Hey everybody, this is Darren and you're watching the Flick Connection podcast. You're either watching it on YouTube or listening to it on a podcast. Either way, should get plenty of good movie recommendations this week. As always, just like the last couple of episodes, I'm going to start off with my picks of the week, which I may not be doing on the podcast much longer. I'll talk a little bit about that, and I'll be looking for your feedback. I'm going to talk a little bit about some future plans I've got coming up, some things I want to do. I'll be looking for some feedback on that. And then I do want to talk about, with Ocean's 8 having come out this past weekend, I want to talk about whether or not adding women to a movie makes a movie better. So we're going to get into that with the topic. As always, we're going to go over the dickhead of the week. I've got one of my favorites this week. It's actually one of the negative comments I get the most often. So I'm actually not singling out a particular comment. I get the same comment all the time, and we're going to talk about that. And then, man, this has been a killer week for movie trailers. There have been a ton of movie trailers that just came out. We're going to talk about some of the best ones, including like the most exciting one that dropped this week. So we'll talk about that after the picks of the week. But starting off my picks of the week with Netflix. Again, Netflix, just like last week, they have not added much. I don't know, June is just sort of a dead month for Netflix, so it's very, very difficult to find really good recommendations. So I'm starting off with Taking Lives. I know a lot of you have probably seen it, and it's an okay serial killer hunt type of a movie. But with that, if you have not seen it, it's definitely one you should watch. To me, it seemed like one of those movies a lot of people would have passed on. Like they feel like they've seen Angelina Jolie enough. You know, it just looked passable. It looked like you could pass it up, and it really is pretty solid. Like, it's got a big twist in it. It's gonna feel a little bit dated at this point because it is over 10 years old now. But if you love a good murder mystery and you just like never saw this one, it's definitely a good way to go. And then I would say another one to watch this week that I have not gotten around to watching, but I'm recommending it this week only because it's Father's Day week, and that's Kodachrome. This is actually a Netflix original, and I don't like recommending movies I haven't seen, but I have heard good things about it, and we'll get into more details as to why I don't have time to watch this movie yet. But it's got Ed Harris in it. Basically, he plays what appears to be like an absentee father that is now like trying to sort of bond with his son, and it looks pretty good. It's really not my type of movie. It's not the type of thing I would normally recommend, and the only reason I'm recommending it is because it is Father's Day weekend coming up, so that would make that one a good one to go with. But also, the Netflix well is running dry. Hopefully they have a much better July than they've had a June. But if you're listening to this maybe for the first time and you're like, what is he talking about? There's plenty of good stuff on Netflix. I've recommended all of it. Check out the YouTube channel. Maybe that's part of the problem. Maybe I recommend too many movies. I have a list of 10 Netflix movies every single week, in addition to my picks of the week, and then I tend to do another video on Friday, usually, that recommends multiple platforms, movies across multiple platforms, and Netflix is always in the mix. And so I'm really exhausting that resource, but on the same note, I mean, I just browsing, trying to find something to watch this weekend. It's just been a nightmare lately for me. So that's it for Netflix. Amazon Prime did do a better job of adding movies in June. They added a lot of good stuff. A couple of Kurt Russell movies. I'm always a big fan of Kurt Russell. One of them, Stargate. Another old one. I know most people that would care about Stargate have probably seen it, but it's really accessible. Like, they made, the sort of the sci-fi channel series. I believe that's what network it played on. I'm sure somebody will correct me, but that show's pretty nerdy, and in a sense that, like, it's for a niche market, whereas the movie is a little bit more accessible, where like anybody could kind of watch it. It's a pretty cool flick. It's not what you would expect to see. If you never saw it, I highly recommend it. If it's been a while since you saw it, it just got added recently, which is why I feel comfortable recommending it. And then another Amazon movie, which I might do a full review on this later this week. I've not written a script for it, so I'm not ready to like go ahead and film that. But it might be my review for Thursday this week on the YouTube channel. But it's a movie called Braven, and it is a cool, of course, You know, I made good notes, and then I can't, I'm terrible with names, and this guy's name's on the tip of my tongue, and I know it. He's a big, Jason Momoa. I don't know why I couldn't remember Jason Momoa's name. He's Aquaman in the new DC movies. But Braven is a little action movie. Basically, some drug lords of some sort use his cabin as like his property as like a stash house, and he ends up kind of in a shootout with them, and then it kind of, you know, then it like escapes, and it sort of looks like it's an action movie, and it's a new release. It's on Amazon Prime, but it feels kind of like cliffhanger in a lot of ways. You know, you're out in the snow, and he seems to be like, he's a very capable person just for sort of defending himself. So it's cool. It's got some good elements to it. He's really sort of blowing up. You know, this one really flew in under the radar. I think it was even available to like stream, like rent while it was in like a limited theater release. I feel like maybe had they kind of waited, or maybe if Aquaman was a little more popular in the DC movie, or if that movie had done better, this would have gotten a wider release. But they went ahead and released it maybe a little early. But he's on the verge. He's got some things in the cooker that are probably going to be pretty solid, including a remake of The Crow, which is not officially happening yet, but apparently he's on board and that's going to happen. I think he'd be really good for that, whether the movie's good or not. But the movie's solid, so check out Braven. I might be talking about that later this week. And then Hulu, believe it or not, I got a couple of recommendations on Hulu that beat what I've got on Netflix right now. One of them is Apollo 13. Great week to watch that. They just released the trailer for First Man, I believe it's called, with Ryan Gosling, where he's playing Neil Armstrong. We're going to talk about that in the trailer segment of this podcast. But Apollo 13 is really one of the better real-life space exploration movies you can watch. There's a handful of them. This one is one of the best. Maybe The Right Stuff, like watch The Right Stuff first and then Apollo 13. The Right Stuff is not available on Hulu at the moment, but Apollo 13 is so cool for a number of reasons. One, it's just an incredible story. It's one of the most incredible stories of the 20th century. And then two, they really did film it in anti-gravity, and you can tell the entire time. They might be on wires a couple of times, but for the most part, and I don't know if they are at all, they might be 100% anti-gravity. But essentially, they had this set built on this plane they call the Vomit Comet, and they use it in training, but they had the set, parts of the set of the shuttle built on it. They would go up in this plane and then just do a free fall, which causes weightlessness within the plane itself and the set. So they had about 2 minutes, maybe just shy of 2 minutes of weightlessness for these takes. And it's a long movie. There are a lot of weightlessness scenes. So that's a really epic filming process. So that alone is worth watching, but it is just an incredible movie at the end of the day. Ron Howard directed it. It's one of his better movies, and he's a great director. And then another really cool movie that I know a lot of people have seen, but just like Taking Lives, just like my recommendation there, this is one of those ones, if you always missed it or passed it, you really should watch it, and that is The Quick and the Dead. Really cool Western that came out of the late 90s. Leonardo DiCaprio's in it, Sharon Stone, Russell Crowe, Gene Hackman, huge cast, and it's got this cool, almost like comic booky kind of a vibe, in an era where we didn't really have movies like that. We had all these really great Westerns in the 60s and 70s, and they fizzled out and they died out. And then somewhere in the 90s, they just come up with this really cool sort of like pulpy, fantasy almost type action Western movie where when people get shot, you can see the hole straight through them. I mean, it's just cool, fun stuff like that. If you know what you're getting into, it's a lot of fun. I've watched this one a bunch. The reason I think a lot of you have seen it is because it used to run on like TBS all the time. If you missed it, definitely go back and check that one out. It's one of the better movies you can currently watch on Hulu right now. As far as HBO goes, A Cure for Wellness is a somewhat new release. It came out last year. It is a really cool, creepy movie. It's done by the same director as like the early Pirates of the Caribbean movies. But this one is a rated R. It's not science fiction, but sort of like fantasy thriller. It takes place in an insane asylum, and it's got some really, really incredible visuals. Now, as far as the storytelling goes, for me, it gets a little bit muddy, could have been a little bit better in places, but that said, it's still a really cool movie watching experience, and it's very dissimilar from anything else, so I highly recommend it for that. If anything, it's a little bit long, so watch it when you have, you know, some time to kill. Watch it in an evening where you're not busy, but I recommend it. I enjoyed watching it. Probably just a one watcher for me because it is long and it does sort of drag out at times, but I definitely don't regret watching it. I really enjoyed it. And then in oldie but a goodie, I'll just stick with two sort of like horror themed movies for HBO because I don't have a theme this week. It's just slim pickings, and I was not able to develop a theme with my list. But Identity is one I've always liked. I say I've always liked it. I bought it like a $5 bin 10 years ago. I don't think I've ever unwrapped it. I think I've even seen it since I bought it somewhere else. But that said, cool movie about a stranger sort of meeting up at a motel out in the desert, and they start getting picked off one by one. So it's got horror elements, it's got mystery elements, all the good stuff, everything you want to see, and it's got a good twist in it. It might not blow your mind because a twist, without, you know, blowing it, it might be a little bit dated, but that said, it is a fun watch, and it's a much shorter watch than A Cure for Wellness, so I do recommend that. I gotta say, on rentals, I hate to do this, but there is nothing releasing this week worth watching that I know of. Now, there may be one that's worth watching, but I'm not aware of it, and I'm aware of everything that's coming out. I'm not aware of any of the titles being something particularly special or interesting that you should watch, and I've definitely not seen any of them. It's a bunk week for that. On that note, I mentioned this movie last week, and it is available for rent somewhat recently, so it is a new release. Game Night, way funnier than I thought it was going to be. I mean, I don't know, I just didn't have high expectations for it. I really just kind of wanted to turn my brain off on Friday night last week, and we rented it and just loved it. We had a ball with it. I said this last week, I don't know why, but Jason Bateman, I like all his movies. I think I end up liking all of them. I can't think of one I don't like, so I don't know why I didn't expect to like this one. I really, really liked it. If you missed that recommendation, I am at least giving you some sort of a rental recommendation for this week. And in the theater, The Incredibles 2 is going to be the pick of the week. There's nothing else to pick from. That's the big movie. I always really like the original. It stands out to me as one of the better Pixar movies for me, for my taste, because it is kind of an action movie. You kind of get this retro spy, almost like 60s James Bond with superpowers kind of a thing. I really, really dug that vibe of the original one, so I'm hoping they retain that. The trailers are showing a lot of the dad babysitting the baby and stuff going haywire. I'm hoping that's just a portion of the movie, and that's not half of the movie. We'll see, but it should be good, even though I will say Pixar sequels, rarely are they as good as the original. Very rarely. There's only a few exceptions. So those are my picks of the week. It's a little bit of a weak week. I hate saying that because it's confusing to say week, but I think next week is going to be much, much better as far as the picks. There's some new stuff getting added to all these platforms. There's some stuff I want to talk about that's not quite ready for me to talk about it. I might mention them briefly, talking about what I watched this week, but they're not currently available, so they'll make upcoming weeks. So we'll get into that. As far as new trailers, let's see, man, there are a bunch. I'm going to start off with some ones you probably aren't aware of, and then we're going to get to like the coolest trailer that came out this week. I'm excited to talk about it. But Serenity is one with, it's not the Firefly movie. It is got Matthew McConaughey and Anne Hathaway, and it looks like an interesting sort of like sex-based thriller. I think he's like a charter boat captain, and he meets a woman who wants him to kill her husband, and it's got like, that's sort of the setup in the trailer, but it looks beautiful. It looks like it's really well shot. It looks really interesting for that. The trailer looks really good. It looks like one of those movies that might not quite be as good as the trailer, so we'll see. I will say he's got another trailer that just dropped really early last week, so it's been like a week since it came out, but White Boy Rick, check that trailer out. It also looks cool. It actually looks a little bit better than Serenity. As far as cool looking movies, Siberia is one with Keanu Reeves. He's fighting off Russian hitmen. It doesn't look like John Wick though. It looks a little bit more realistic, like kind of the reluctant hero type of thing. I'm not sure why he's doing it. He usually makes really good choices. He is a millionaire and doesn't really have to do movies, and so because of that he picks projects he's really interested in. So I'm curious what about this has made him interested in it, particularly because there are some similarities with John Wick. There's got to be some sort of something to it that would make him interested in this. That said, Predator, the Predator, I think is The Predator is the title of the new Predator reboot. I have been excited for this since I first heard about it. One of the reasons is Shane Black wrote and directed it. Shane Black, if you don't know, he wrote and directed The Nice Guys with Ryan Gosling and Russell Crowe, which I really, really enjoyed. Everyone that saw that movie enjoyed it. You know, everybody I talked to did. And it got really high ratings. It was really fun. I was excited for him to do Predator because he also starred. He's also one of the like red shirts in the original Predator. He's one of the first guys to go, but that's kind of a cool element for him to like now have this successful directing career and to come back and like reboot the series. So I was interested in that. The trailer does not look good. This is trailer number 2, and neither one has me interested in it. If I didn't know Shane Black had done it, I'd have zero interest. I would not be going to see this movie. That said, I still am kind of holding out hope that it's going to be good, just because I think he's got to do a good job, but again, nothing about the trailers look like the typical stuff. It's like, oh, now we got to have a bigger Predator. Now we got to do the, it just, I don't know, it just looks really, really basic, and I don't care to see it if that's the case. Talking about basic, they just released a trailer for Bumblebee, which is a spin-off of Transformers. I guess it's going to have a smaller budget because there's not going to be as many Transformers, so it's not going to be as heavy on the visual effects. The thing about the Transformers movies, I'm not just going to sit here and bash like your favorite movie, but they're not good. I mean, they like visually they're really impressive. Like that's really what you're watching them for, but the jokes don't land. The story is about as basic as it can get. It's almost the same in every single movie, with like just details change, but the story's the same. I don't know. I'm not gonna go into it too much. There's really no point. But a cool looking trailer. If you haven't seen it, just go look this one up. There was a point in the YouTube. Was starting up the YouTube channel. I was like, oh, I'm just going to post trailers. People like to watch trailers. I'll post them. I won't be able to monetize them. Like, I won't make money off of them. But people will find my channel. They'll see my other content. That did not work out. So I will not be posting these trailers where you can see them, but you can just Google them. This one is worth Googling. Bad Times at the El Royale. Looks really sick. Like, I'm watching it. It's this vintage. I can't remember now. I'm thinking like, I'm not sure. I think it's like the 60s. It's this really cool vintage sort of hotel is what it looks like, or at least like a club. John Hamm's in it. Hemsworth is in it. It's got a big cast, but it looks almost like a kind of a Coen Brothers thing, and then it looks really dark and creepy and weird, and it's colorful, and there's like a bank heist at some point in it, and like it just really, I mean, like, I'm super excited for this movie. Then I look it up, I find out it's the director of Cabin in the Woods, which I love that movie. He hasn't done anything since. He's doing this. It looks really, really good, so I'm excited for that. I think that's going to be kind of a sleeper hit. I'm going to go ahead and predict it now because you know, he's done one movie a lot of people liked. I don't think there's going to be a ton of buzz around the fact that he's the guy that did Cabin in the Woods, and it's kind of an odd type movie. It's not based on a previous successful thing, you know, so there's not going to be a ton of buzz, but I predict this is one of those ones that comes out, a lot of people talk about it, it does better than expected in the theater, and then does really well once it releases for people to like rent and all that. I think it's going to become kind of a cult thing, possibly. It looks that good. And then I skipped over, because I'm at the big one. Did I not make it? There we go. First Man is a movie where Ryan Gosling is playing Neil Armstrong. It looks really good. I just find that whole, just the fact that we did that is just so fascinating. So I'll be real interested to see that. He's one of my favorite actors. It's one of the most compelling stories or triumphs in recent American history, fairly recent American history. I mean, I don't know. It's hard to say with American history. The country's less than 250 years old. But it looks really good. And then I find out it's the director of Whiplash and La La Land. Liked both of those. Really loved Whiplash. I say liked La La Land because I really don't like musicals, and I dug La La Land a lot. I'll quick departure, since this is a podcast and I can talk about whatever I want. I took my wife to see it back when our son was probably, let's say, 6 months old. So we hadn't been to the movies. We didn't get to go to the movies because of where we live. I don't have family nearby, and to pay a babysitter to go to the movies is really, really expensive. So we just don't go to the movies. Well, my mom was in town. She let us go to the movies, which she often does. So this was like our first trip to the movies in a long time. I didn't tell her what we were going to go see, take her to see La La Land, just thinking it'll be a nice date night. We went and had dinner. It would be a nice kind of romantic movie. And then it starts, and if you've seen the movie, you know there's like that huge musical number on the freeway where everyone's dancing on the cars. She does not like musicals either, just like me. She cut her eyes at me. I mean, she was staring daggers at me, like, did you bring me to a... Like, she was also confused. She had no idea why I was bringing her to a musical, but it ended up being great. I only watched it that one time, but I thought it was really, really fantastic. So, him doing, I'm glad he's getting away from music-based movies. It would have really gotten kind of dry had he just kind of pigeonholed himself into that. So, hopefully he does a good job with something like First Man. It looks like a really epic, like soup to nuts beginning of the research for the space program, or the beginning of test flights and stuff with Neil Armstrong, all the way to the moon landing. That's what the trailer looks like it's going to cover. So it's probably going to be long, and it's probably going to be pretty epic. And then the trailer of the week is Halloween. The new Halloween trailer out. If you haven't seen it, go look it up. I would imagine most people interested in the new Halloween movie have seen this trailer already. It looks really, really good. Looks like it was done really well done. Now, I liked the Rob Zombie remakes. I thought they were cool. They had their own style. I like his style. Even his movies that aren't particularly good, I enjoy watching them. They're just sort of like a feast for the eyes. This, though, looks like they're playing it fairly straight. The only thing that seems a little odd is they do have Jamie Lee Curtis back in it. It's not just a remake, it's a continuation, which seems odd to do because that has not played out well in the past. But it looks like they're doing it right. She's got like long gray hair. She's like, it just looks like they're doing it right. John Carpenter produced, but the interesting thing is, where is it? David Gordon Green and Danny McBride wrote this movie. David Gordon Green directed it. Now, if that name sounds familiar, or even if it doesn't, if you're not sure who that is, he directed Pineapple Express. He directed that horrible one with Danny McBride where he was like a knight. But he's done a handful of really good heavy thrillers. He did a couple of thrillers, including one called Undertow, which I highly recommend. He did that before Pineapple Express. So he's a very capable director in that genre. Him and Danny McBride are close after all the movies they've done together. And this sounds like they were probably drinking one night, maybe even a little high, and decided they wanted to write Halloween. And I've heard Danny McBride talk about this before this trailer was released, that they were just working on it. They were writing it. And it just sounds like they were serious about making a good Halloween sequel, and based on the trailer, it looks like that's what they did. So I highly recommend checking that out. That is going to be one of the big buzzworthy movies the weeks leading up to its release. I anticipate it to be pretty good at the very least, if not really good. So that is that for recommendations and the trailers of the week. I'm going to take a quick break. We're going to come back with the Dickhead of the Week, and then we're going to talk a little bit about whether jamming women into movies and reboots makes them any better. And we are back with everybody's favorite segment, the Dickhead of the Week. If you're new to the podcast, this is basically, I've got a YouTube channel. I encourage you to check it out. There's a lot more movie-related content on the YouTube channel. A video every single weekday, including this podcast on Mondays. I put the full video up so you can see my ugly mug for an hour. But this segment, basically I pull the worst comment I got on YouTube and we talk about it. Last week it brought up things about the Obama Netflix boycott. This week, nothing quite as spicy as that, but it really is the negative comment that I get the most often. Probably not every day, but definitely several times a week. Maybe an average of 7 times a week, if not 7, then at least 5. I get some sort of variation of "you talk too much." It could be as simple as "you talk too much." It's usually "you talk too much, just show the clips. You talk too much, just list the movies." And the reason this one really bugs the shit out of me is, one, it's my show, I can do whatever I want with it. Two, it's not the format of what you're watching. You can't just click on a video and expect it to be what you want it to be. It's already a thing that exists. It is what it is. And if you haven't ever watched the videos, basically what I'm talking about is it's when I do a top 10 action movies on Netflix, let's say, and I'll list out 10 movies. I tend to get really good feedback across the board, but I'll list out 10 movies and I'll spend about a minute per movie. So right about 60 seconds. Sometimes I might go 70 seconds, sometimes I might go 45. But that's about it. I never really talk any more than that about any given one. And it's essentially like a 1-minute movie review. Very similar to what I just did with the Flicks of the Week. Sometimes it's a little bit more insightful. Sometimes I don't want to give away spoilers. But basically, that's it. Now, the people that are commenting this, I'm not sure what else the video is supposed to be. One, I can't just put together 10 trailers and put that out. That's not original content. Two, if I'm not talking and explaining them, I'm not sure where the value is. You could just look up stuff and look at trailers yourself. And if you really don't want any talking and you just want to list, why are you watching videos? You could just Google it. There's going to be a list. Someone will have typed up a list of the top 10 action movies. I'm not sure where that logic's coming from. I get it. You don't want to listen to me talk for 10 minutes. But you can just stop the damn video and go Google it and try to find content somewhere else. The stuff I'm putting out is for people who want these 1-minute movie reviews, and there seems to be a lot of you, so I really appreciate everyone that watches and leaves positive comments. Negative comments, believe it or not, they are just as welcome as positive ones, not just because I do this segment, but because YouTube doesn't know what a negative comment is. It only knows that the video got another comment. So everyone leaving negative comments actually helped the video a little bit. So that's fantastic. And then one reason I wanted to bring this up this week is because I do eventually plan on starting a website that will then do just that. It will list them out. It will link to the videos. It'll link to the segments of the videos so you can see the short part of the review. It'll have additional information, content. It'll be another go-to place. If you're a fan, if you like what I'm doing, that should just be somewhere else you can go check out on the fly. There'll be regular posts. Eventually, people keep asking, eventually I'll get on Twitter. I really don't have any interest to do it right now. It's hard enough keeping up with Instagram. And on that note, you know, I've got over 70,000 followers on Instagram, and my engagement rate is just slowly dropping, and I think it's to do with changes in Instagram's algorithms. YouTube's doing the same thing, so, you know, that's a whole nother nightmare I'm not going to bore anybody with. But I cannot, every time I get one of those comments, I'm like, what are you doing watching this video? Just watch something else, or just do your own research. I did all this research. I've watched all these movies. I'm talking to you about each one for a minute, and that's too much. Like, 10 seconds isn't enough to really say anything about a movie. It takes 5 seconds to almost say the title of some of these movies and who's in it. So, that said, it just is one of those things that really gets under my skin every time I see it. Because I just don't get it. I don't know why you're not just doing something else with your life. Like, you had the time to leave the comment, but you don't have time to listen to me recommend movies, which most people, when they leave positive comments, in 10 minutes, like if you really think about it, in 10 minutes, I'm giving you more movie recommendations and more things to potentially watch than you could get by browsing for 10 minutes. You could spend the same 10 minutes browsing, and you're not going to come away with as many movies you haven't seen with the anticipation of watching them. So that's really what the channel has turned into on YouTube. Again, if you're listening on the podcast, you haven't seen it. It really saves from what the positive comments are. It really saves people a lot of time. They'll just watch one of my videos, pick one of them, and then go watch it, and not spend 30 minutes on Netflix trying to figure out what to watch, because it's so funny. We have so many options now. Like, I'm talking about how Netflix is having a bad month and there's not good stuff. There's a ton of good stuff you can watch on there. I've just already recommended most of it. But it's, you know, when we used to go to the movie, the theater, when we used to go to the video store, I know I was the same way, because I'd see, and everyone else was, because I'd see the same people in there for the same 45 minutes I was in there. You'd spend forever in the video store trying to pick out something to watch, and all you had was the box and what it said on the back. That's really all you had, and you still spent forever. Now we've got the equivalent of the box, the thumbnail, and a short description, but we've got ratings, we've got, you know, the Netflix's stupid rating system with that percentage thing. It's so horrible. I'll get into that one day. But we have other content, and now you can just look stuff up on your phone. You can see what it was rated. You can read quick little reviews. You can watch content like mine. I still spend, I know people do because you're telling me in the comments, we still spend the same amount of time trying to pick something out. I'll spend half of the watch time of a movie just trying to pick it out. So this week was particularly rough for me. I really had a hard time picking something out. But there are worse problems you could have in your life. Movies I watched this week, real quick, and then we're going to get into the whole whether or not women make movies better thing. Blade Runner 2049, rewatched it. It's been a little while since I've seen it. I really just love the movie from top to bottom. It is very, very slow. This movie does slow very, very well. The reason it's slow, the story itself, if they were to edit it together, you could do like a faster cut of this and it would be a much faster movie. But what the movie's doing is just really establishing stuff. The camera lingers on the main characters for longer. You see how they're feeling. The camera hangs in an environment for a while before anybody starts talking. It really is patient in building the world, establishing the characters with very little words. It does all of that really well. And as a result, it's what would otherwise almost be like let's say a 100-minute movie. and it takes about 145 minutes to get through it. No, it's longer than that. It's like 165 minutes it takes to get through it. So it's like 60% longer than it would really need to be. But because it's patient like that, it really has a unique feel to it. And you get to spend more time in this world. And I, for one, want to spend more time there. So for that, I really like it. The downside is because it was so long and because it was so slow, it didn't do well financially, and we may not get to spend more time in that universe by, way of not getting a sequel. So that's a shame. Hopefully they're able to do something with that, but it looks like we might not get one. Excuse me. I made a huge mistake and ate some peanuts before I came up here, and man, they get my throat. I think I might even have a mild allergy. I just kind of cough like a while after eating peanuts. I feel like my throat, it doesn't feel like it swells up, but it might a little bit. I don't know. As far as like a really good recommendation that I watched early, just last weekend, really before I recorded last week's podcast, is Upgrade. I did a review on the channel last week. You can go check that out. The first half is spoiler free. The second half is heavy spoilers. So if you've seen it, you'll dig that. I really enjoyed Upgrade. I highly recommend it. It's a simple story. It's not real complicated, but it plays it so well. The action's great in it. It's doing things you haven't seen before. In the comments section on my review, I felt like I described it pretty well. I thought it was a mix between John Wick and Ex Machina. I even feel like it feels a little bit like kind of like a rebirth of John Carpenter. But someone said it's basically like a 90-minute Black Mirror episode. They're absolutely right. If you love Black Mirror, you are going to dig Upgrade, and you're going to be surprised by it. I think a lot of people passed on this movie because it just looks like kind of hacky. Like it looked like I don't know. It just looked like a half-assed kind of movie. It's very good. Really cool. Watch my review on it if you're interested. Another one that I will be talking about very soon that I watched recently is Unsane, which is a pretty terrible name. I don't like that name. But this whole movie was filmed on an iPhone. I need to do research before I do an actual video on this to see if it's one iPhone, because I think it might be. Or did they have multiples and it was just shot on iPhones? The reason I say it might be is the camera, and I'll talk more about this because I'm probably going to do a full review on this. The camera would do this interesting thing where it would be like, let's say this camera now is looking at me. If you're on YouTube, you know what I'm talking about. But the camera's facing one direction, and then it just as a jump cut, it'll cut to the next camera angle, and the camera's essentially looking exactly where the tripod for the other shot, the previous shot, would have been. So it's almost like someone just like flipped the camera really quick, and it kept doing that the whole time. And part of the reason that worked is because essentially the movie's about a girl who maybe gets mistakenly admitted to an insane asylum, and the whole time you're not sure if she's really crazy and making things up, or if she's completely sane and she's really not supposed to be there. So your brain kind of keeps going back and forth in almost the same way, like doing an about face, and the camera does just to that. It keeps doing like this about face with the editing. I thought it was really cool. Man, whew. Every time that door to this room I'm in cracks open, when the air kicks on, I've mentioned it before, that door just sort of eases open. It just like, the nerves in the back of my neck just tingle for a second because it just like, it opens just at the right like slow pace, and especially I'm talking about like a creepy movie. I've talked enough about how hard it is for me to find stuff to watch. I want to talk a little bit about whether or not women make movies better. The reason for this is I saw like I don't know what channel it was on, but they were talking about Ocean's 8, and they were like, what other movies would be better if women replaced the men in them? And they were just having fun with it, but it's like, my brain like thought about it for a minute. I tried to come up with something, and I'm like, none. No movies would be better if you just replace the cast with women. That is not what would make it better. Like, why would that make it better? And the same goes for the other way. If you take a movie that had a completely female cast and you just replace them with men, that wouldn't... That alone, like, it's changing the gender of the cast doesn't do much for the movie. Now, there are little things that would change, maybe, but I don't get the logic in it, and so I don't even get the logic in doing it at all. It failed with Ghostbusters, yet they're still trying to do it, and so, like, I don't have a problem with it at all. I don't care. I'm not going to go see the movie. I'm not interested in it at all. But why, like, force it and go, oh, and I didn't even realize the original Ocean's movies were all men. Like, I just thought it was, like, mostly men. Like, and I could not place a woman. Now, I know Julia Roberts was in it, and then she had more of a role in the second one, and then there were some women that kind of played a role in the last one, but the first one, for sure, and really the second one, if you want to be honest, it's all men. I just, like, I don't know, I miss that aspect of it. But then I'm, like, very aware that the new one is all women, so that's weird. I don't know, but it doesn't look very good. It's got decent reviews. And then, you know, all the headlines I'm reading, because I'm reading them, like, movie news to try to find, like, what do I want to talk about this week. The big news is that it's breaking a record for the franchise. It's breaking it by like $1 million. And this is like 10 years later. So they're not adjusting for inflation. So it's actually not doing as well as the originals, if we want to be really honest about it. And compare it to, and I'm not being sexist at all here, compare that to Hereditary, which also came out the same day. It's making, it's Sunday night here, but it's that I'm filming this on Sunday night, you know, it's on par to make 15 million. Now I know that's not even half of 41 million for Oceans, but it's a much smaller movie. So Oceans, I looked it up because I was very curious. Oceans had a $70 million budget. Hereditary has a $5 million budget. Hereditary made its money back. Now, we're not talking about marketing money on either of these movies yet, but Hereditary made its budget back on an opening night. And it's outperforming expectations, whereas Oceans is maybe meeting expectations. And Hereditary has a predominantly female cast. It's not as big as Oceans, but it's a female lead. There's no mention of that in the news. Nobody seems to care. So obviously it's not that important to the movie. It's whether or not the movie's any good. And that's what we should really be worried about here. Is it a good movie? Ocean sounds like it's about what you would expect. Not bad, not great. Kind of just maybe kind of a waste of time. And I don't mean to hate on it. If you went out and saw it and enjoyed it, that's great. I would imagine most people that enjoy it probably really, really enjoyed the others. I've always, you know, thought Oceans were okay. I mean, I enjoyed the first. Really no passion for the sequels whatsoever, and this is basically just another sequel. Let's see, I got some more notes here because I really kind of went down a rabbit hole here. Oh, and then there's all this other stuff like whether or not women make less money than men in Hollywood. And the reason that's even significant is because there's a whole debate on, you know, women making 70 whatever cents to the dollar as men, and there's all sorts of statistics that back that up or dispute it. But as far as Hollywood goes, considering Holly's like home base for you know, liberals, is, you know, they run it. It would be odd to think that women there, of all places, basically is what I'm saying, would make less than men. But anytime it comes up, it makes sense. So one that came up real recently was Jurassic World. People were upset that Dallas Bryce Howard was making less money than Chris Pratt. Turns out she's only making $5 million less than him, which it's a small percentage on the amount of money that they're making difference. I'm honestly surprised it's that close. She is not nearly as big of a star as he is. He's in Guardians of the Galaxy. He's in the latest Avengers movie. I mean, he puts butts in the seats. People will go see. You could make an action movie that that's not tied to a franchise, nobody knows anything about. Put him in it, people will go see it. You can do the same thing with her. Way less people are going to go see it. So that's what actors, big actors, are really paid based on. They're paid a fee based on the amount of money that movie's going to make, solely based on their presence in it. And it's also based on how many days they're going to be on set, what their other demands are, you know, for filming, physical demands, you know, the marketing schedule, how much you're going to travel. On a movie like this, they're probably going everywhere together. But that said, there's a lot of factors, and it's not just, oh, they're both in it, they're both the leads, they should make the same amount of money. That's not the case. And then a similar case from last year was people were talking about how the guy that plays Superman was making more than Gal Gadot made for Wonder Woman. And then that ended up actually being false, where they were basically making the same amount of money. Because the thing with them, like, she is a mega star now. She is a mega star. She was known, but Wonder Woman made her a mega star. She wasn't when she got cast for that movie, and neither was he when he got cast for Superman. So they're paid accordingly. And I thought that was funny that people made a big stink about that, and it turned out to be completely false. But one thing I can't figure out is every time I go on to... And there's no doubt that women would make less in Hollywood, because when you really think about actors that draw people in, I'm talking about actors, all they have to do is put their face on a poster and they're going to get people to come. There's less female leads that can do that than men, and that has less to do with sexism and more to do with, like, at least I think, more to do with the fact that, like, they haven't really been able to successfully mold as many, because they make stars. They find somebody that can act. There's millions of people in Los Angeles that can act. The best people are not the ones that make it necessarily. They can all do it. So the good actors, a dime a dozen. You cut down maybe 10% of those people are really, really good looking where they could be on camera. That still leaves millions of people. Why do some people get to be in movies over and over again? It's because the studios try to make a star. And you see them do this all the time. You're like, why is that kid in that movie all of a sudden you'll see somebody you didn't know of that's in 2 movies back to back, and then a third, and it's like they're making a star. That way they have a face to slap on a poster, and they can get more butts in the seats. They have to, like, farm this and grow it. They seem to be less successful at doing it with women than they do with men, and I think it's because they did it with men for so long through most of the 20th century, made all these heroes. You know, man is, you know, the hero is usually a man, like in storytelling, and because of that, they did that, and there was sexism, you know, throughout the 20th century. But because that worked for so long, they knew how to do it. Like, they knew how to make a new Steve McQueen, a Charles Bronson. And then they tried to apply the same formula. And I really am just talking off the top of my head here. I've completely abandoned my notes, so I apologize. But I feel like they tried to apply the same formula to women, which is why we got, like, Angelina Jolie, where she's, like, kicking somebody's ass in every movie. And, you know, they couldn't figure out how to, like, build a star with a woman in the same way that they did with a man, and they tried to do it the same way, and it worked sometimes, it didn't work all the time. So I think their just success rate of building up a star from a female lead is lower. And when I talk about people that you can just put on a poster, if I don't know how good your memory is, if you think about the John Wick poster for the original, even the sequel, it literally was just Keanu Reeves' face. It was his face with, like, a fuse coming out from underneath his tie. That's it. No guns, no explosions, no nothing. Just his face. I just recently watched Red Sparrow. Female lead, Jennifer Lawrence, one of the hottest female leads going right now. Probably one of the top paid female leads working today. It's just a red poster with her face right on the front. Just that's, you know, and like birds coming out of her head. Same concept poster design. And that's because they're both those types of actors. They're both those types of stars. I think the success rate is just lower with women. And the reason I even sort of started looking into that is because I'm like, well, there's all this debate over women getting paid less in Hollywood. And I'm like, yeah, but there's not as many, like, the big stars, just like I've been talking about. But every time I go to IMDb, when you look at most popular stars, you just scroll, it's all women. I mean, it's like, it'll be 5 women in a row, 1 guy, 3 women in a row, one guy, 1 woman, and 1 guy, 3 women. You just go from like rank number 1, and that's based on like searches, people looking people up. But right now, there does seem to be a lot of interest in female leads. You've got Margot Robbie, you've got a ton. I'm not going to sit here and list them all, but they seem to be figuring out how to make a interesting, female lead that you can come back and watch over and over again and enjoy, like a movie star that and they're doing it differently than they used to. They're figuring out how to make like that female hero, and we've seen that like Charlize Theron. She's always been a big deal, but we've seen her recently kind of like become more of the hero, and I think like Fury Road did a fantastic job with that, where they made her this like incredible character, but she was very different from what a male character would have been. And she wasn't your typical female character either. Like, I think that's a good example of them figuring out how to make these female leads interesting on their own and unique on their own, where we want to come see them over and over again. So I think that's really what the problem is. People want to cry sexism, and they're welcome to cry whatever they want to cry. But I think it really is, we're in the throes of them figuring it out. What I think they need to stop doing, I think they need to keep up what I'm talking about. Figuring out how to make these interesting female characters. That is interesting. I want to see that. I want to see movies like Fury Road. I don't want to see a remake of a movie that is only 10 years old, that they just stick Rihanna and 7 other women in. There's just no value in that. Now, maybe the movie's good. I'm really not trying to dog on it too much, but come on, how good could it be? I mean, it's a gimmick. I honestly, I hate to say if I were a woman, I'd be more insulted to be used as a gimmick than to be given the chance to develop this new thing. So that's enough of that. I really sort of enjoyed that rant. On a similar note, I promise, this is not a political show. I'm not planning on getting political. If you pay attention, excuse me, I was pretty down the middle. Last week, I kind of brushed up against it, talking about the Obama Netflix boycott, but I basically just told you how boycotting Netflix doesn't do anything because of how their algorithm works, so I had some unique insight into that. And for the most part, comments were pretty political free. I had a couple of loons that, I think I had one nut on each side that kind of tore into me because they had no idea. They probably didn't listen to it, to be honest. I mean, it was in the second half of the show. I doubt they really sat there and found the spot where I talked about it and really listened to the point that I was making, because it wasn't political at all. I think they probably read Obama's name in the title and just had a comment locked and loaded, ready to go. That said, that is it for this episode of Flick Connection Uncut. If you're listening on a podcast, I really appreciate you. Rate the show, review it. It helps a lot. Viewership's going up a little bit week by week. Very, very new to this, but I've been doing YouTube for about a year. Thanks to all of you. If you sat here for an hour and looked at me talking, let me know in the comments below, but I'd be willing to bet most of you are maybe listening to me while you're at work and have your earbuds in. That's what I do for podcasts. That's really what this is intended for. Somebody last week told me this was way too long. I don't intend for you to sit here and watch me just flap my gums for an hour, but if you do it, I appreciate you. I will keep making shows like this as long as you keep listening to and watching them. But thanks for listening to and watching this one, and you will see or hear me next time.